Lately, I've been feeling pretty uncomfortable with the person I'm becoming just to survive socially. This led me to the ill-fated adventure known as trying to be genuinely good in a world that punishes authentic kindness. So, to understand why I feel morally exhausted, I embarked on the mission of reading Dostoevsky's The Idiot. What I found was a brutal diagnosis of why truly good people don't survive contact with reality. In 1868, Dostoevsky created a disturbing literary experiment. He placed a man incapable of malice in the middle of Russian high society to see what would happen. Spoiler: the world completely destroyed him. And maybe that explains why you feel so tired of trying to be decent. Dostoevsky had a bold and almost impossible literary project. He wanted to create what he called a positively good man. Not a stained glass saint abstracted from human reality. Not a moral parable character who exists only to illustrate an edifying lesson, but a real human being functioning in the concrete world with genuine kindness as a central and irremovable personality trait. Prince Lev Nikolaevich Mishkin returns to Russia after years institutionalized in a Swiss sanatorium treating severe epilepsy. He never studied networking. He doesn't master the social games we learn in childhood, calculating advantages in every interaction. For us, it's automatic. For him, impossible. He's simply incapable of malice in the same way you or I are incapable of flying by willpower. Notice the word I chose, incapable. Not chooses not to be malicious as an exercise in moral development. Not tries to be good as a self-improvement project you start in January and abandon in March. He literally can't think in terms of manipulation, strategic advantage, social lies necessary to preserve harmony or protect status. When he meets someone for the first time, he sees a complete human being. When someone tells a story, he believes by default, without the protective cynicism we all develop. When he witnesses suffering, he feels automatic, reflexive compassion without going through the internal filters of, does this person deserve my empathy? Or, will helping here cost me something I don't want to pay? And the world labels him as such, not as a literary metaphor. Literally, concretely. From the first pages, everyone treats Mishkin as mentally deficient. The family that receives him treats him with the condescension reserved for children or people with severe cognitive limitations. Acquaintances talk about him in the third person, even when he's present in the room. Strangers assume they can easily deceive him, that they can exploit his naivety, but he's not stupid. On the contrary, he's surprisingly eloquent, deeply educated in European art and philosophy, capable of psychological analyses so precise about the people around him that he frequently makes them uncomfortable with the accuracy of his perception. So why this classification? Because he's fundamentally incapable of the three competencies that our civilization considers signs of functional social intelligence: strategic malice, calculation of advantages, and self-preservation lies. He trusts people without a track record that justifies trust. He believes in good even when all empirical evidence points to self-interest disguised as virtue. He doesn't defend himself when attacked because he simply doesn't interpret human conflict as a zero-sum game where he needs to destroy the other to guarantee his own survival. In the logic of the world, not specifically the Russian world of the 19th century, but the world as a social system that perpetuates itself through generations, this isn't admirable virtue. It's dangerous pathology that needs to be contained. French sociologist Émile Durkheim would develop decades later the concept of social facts, behavioral patterns that exist independently of individuals and exert coercion over us. Mishkin is incapable of obeying basic social facts: the necessary lie, the protective calculation, strategic cruelty. That's why he needs to be classified as sick. Dostoevsky forces us to confront a truth we'd prefer to keep implicit. We've built an entire society where genuine, spontaneous kindness, without calculation of return, needs to be reclassified as mental illness so we can continue pretending we're good while acting with calculated cruelty in the name of realism, prudence, protecting our interests and the interests of those we love. Think about how you behave in an important work meeting where decisions affect careers. You agree with ideas you find questionable because publicly disagreeing would create unnecessary friction, and mark you as difficult to work with. You praise mediocre or even counterproductive projects because the organization's internal politics requires demonstrations of mutual support. You don't say certain obvious truths because it's not the appropriate time, or because that wouldn't be strategic for my position. This isn't cynicism. It's not moral weakness. It's basic social competence that separates successful professionals from unemployed idealists. That's how functional adults operate in the real world, in simultaneous layers of truth and performance, always calibrating what can be said versus what needs to remain implicit. But now imagine someone in that same meeting who simply says what they think without political filter, literally believes what others say instead of interpreting through layers of implicit meaning, doesn't understand why everyone would be pretending agreement when they internally disagree. Your first assessment would be, this person has something neurologically wrong. They won't survive here. And you'd be right. Because Dostoevsky was asking a philosophical question disguised as a psychological novel. What if the entire structure we call civilized society is fundamentally incompatible with non-strategic kindness? What if all our institutions, from the job market to romantic relationships, from democratic politics to cultural production, are built on the tacit premise that everyone is performing some level of virtue while pursuing self-interest? And the person who doesn't participate in this collective performance breaks the entire system of social coordination. Mishkin enters St. Petersburg high society, a world of impeccable etiquette transmitted through generations, of performative charity that fills social columns in newspapers, of abstract philosophical discussions in literary salons where intellectuals debate morality while invisible servants circulate with French champagne. Everyone follows the rigid codes of good society. They demonstrate compassion for the poor as long as they remain abstract, distant, objects of institutional charity, and not concrete human beings asking for personal help. They discuss morality and social reform as long as it doesn't require changing the structures that guarantee their privileges. They value honor and principles as long as it's convenient to long-term self-interest. American sociologist Thorstein Veblen, Dostoevsky's late contemporary, would coin the term conspicuous consumption to describe how upper classes perform status through ostentatious spending. But Dostoevsky sees something deeper. High society doesn't just consume wealth conspicuously, it conspicuously consumes virtue. Morality becomes a commodity. Public demonstrations increase social capital. Real sacrifice, optional. But when confronted with concrete, non-performative kindness, Mishkin treating Nastasia, the woman with a past marked by society, with exactly the same dignity he treats Princess Aglaya, forgiving serious offenses without expecting anything in return, or even registering that he deserves gratitude. Loving people without calculating emotional or social return. These salon virtuosos reveal their true moral structure. They're cruel when cruelty protects position. They're calculating when they need to preserve status. They're selfish when genuine generosity costs something material or reputational. There's a revealing scene early in the novel that establishes the entire dynamic. Mishkin is visiting the Ivolgin family home, where everyone performs aristocratic politeness with choreographed precision. Ganya, a 28-year-old man consumed by social ambition but stuck in a mediocre bureaucratic position, is being actively forced by his own family to marry Nastasia Filipovna, a woman whose reputation has been irrevocably stained by years as the mistress of a wealthy nobleman, but who now brings a generous dowry of 75,000 rubles that would save the Ivolgin family from imminent financial ruin. The marriage is an obvious transaction. Everyone knows, nobody says. Her money buys his respectability, but they call it love and honor. Everyone in the room knows exactly what's happening. Everyone understands that Ganya is literally being sold by the family, and that Nastasia is buying access to social respectability that her money alone can't guarantee. And everyone accepts this hypocrisy as reality of life, as necessary pragmatism, as the way the world works for mature people. Mishkin simply sees. He sees Ganya's suffering being sold by the very family that should protect him. He sees Nastasia's humiliation being reduced to a commodity with a specific market value. He just recognizes the obvious that everyone pretends not to see. This makes him immediately dangerous. It destroys the system of shared meanings that keeps that room functioning. Because the society of hypocritical virtuosos functions on a sophisticated, tacit agreement that rarely needs to be verbalized. Everyone knows that everyone is pretending to different degrees, but no one can explicitly point out this collective performance without destroying the very social fabric. It's like stage magic. It only works as long as everyone collectively agrees not to mention the obvious tricks. The person who breaks this coordinated silence, not through calculated rebellion, not through a desire to expose hypocrisy, but through literal neurological incapacity to participate in the shared lie, destroys the invisible social contract that allows systemic cruelty to continue operating smoothly with a clean collective conscience. Scottish philosopher David Hume argued in the 18th century that society functions not by rational agreement, but by tacit conventions that emerge organically. Dostoevsky takes this further. The most fundamental tacit convention of any functional society is the coordinated performance of virtue without the requirement of real virtue. Mishkin doesn't understand this basic rule. That's why he's as dangerous as someone who doesn't understand that we shouldn't mention that the emperor has no clothes. Nastasia Filipovna is perhaps Dostoevsky's most psychologically devastating creation. Her story is too common to be dismissed as a tragic exception. She was adopted while still very young by Afanasy Ivanovich Totsky, a wealthy nobleman who, under the pretext of educating her in European arts and languages, was actually grooming her to be exploited when she reached maturity. What began as guardianship ended in abuse of power. When the novel begins, she carries the indelible social mark of the fallen woman, a label that society assigns but never removes. Men of high society desire her sexually with an intensity proportional to her exceptional beauty, while they despise her morally for exactly the same reason. She represents the forbidden that they can consume without social consequences for themselves. Elite women exclude her from respectable circles while secretly envying the male attention she monopolizes. She exists in a perfectly calibrated social limbo, too beautiful to be ignored, too stained to be accepted as an equal, too rich to be completely discarded, but not respectable enough for true integration. Everyone wants her in some way, whether as a sexual object, as a trophy, as an interesting scandal, as a redemption project, but no one respects her as a complete moral agent. No one, except Mishkin. He sees her for the first time in a photograph, and immediately recognizes not the beauty everyone comments on, but the suffering no one mentions. When they finally meet, he speaks to her as if she were a complete human being, not an object of desire, not a charity case, not a social scandal, just a person who suffered injustices and deserves to be seen in her fundamental dignity. And this pure love is absolutely unbearable for her. Here's the paradox that Dostoevsky understood and that therapists take years to explain to patients. Deeply wounded people develop tolerance for pain, but they don't develop the capacity to receive healthy love. Nastasia was so corrupted by interactions where everyone wanted something from her, sex, status, scandal, that disinterested love seems alien, threatening, impossible to be true. When Mishkin says he loves her unconditionally, she interprets it as, he's too naive to see who I really am. When he offers egalitarian marriage, she thinks, he pities me, and that's humiliating. When he forgives her cruelty, she concludes, he's too weak to truly face me. She literally doesn't have a mental category to process love that doesn't charge a price. So she runs away, repeatedly. She chooses Rogozhin, a man who desires her with sick, obsessive, possessive passion. A man she knows is dangerous, and that danger is comforting because it makes sense. Destructive passion is the language the world taught her. Redemptive love is a foreign language she'll never learn to speak. If you're over 40, you've probably witnessed this tragedy. You've known someone, maybe you even were someone, incapable of accepting healthy love. People who sabotage functional relationships because the absence of drama seems boring, who interpret kindness as weakness, stable partners as boring, consistent affection as a trap. They're not foolish. They were trained, experience by experience, to distrust everything that doesn't hurt. Society corrupted her so completely that she can no longer receive the only thing that would save her. And then, it condemns her for failing to be saved. Mishkin's presence in high society functions as a chemical reagent that reveals the true moral composition of each person. The Yapanchin family represents the top of the social pyramid. Generals, imperial connections, European education, well-documented philanthropy. They are, by all public standards, good people. When Aglaya, the youngest daughter, becomes interested in Mishkin, the family tolerates it. He's a prince after all, even if impoverished and eccentric. There's pedigree, there's title. They can work with that. Family conversations revolve around how to domesticate his eccentricities, how to make him presentable, how to transform him into a suitable husband. But when Mishkin demonstrates genuine intention to help Nastasia, to treat her as an equal, to consider her worthy of public defense, the Yapanchin's true morality emerges. They destroy him socially. They mobilize the complete network of aristocratic gossip to ensure he's seen as inadequate, unstable, dangerous to the family reputation. And they do all this feeling virtuous, protecting their innocent daughter from the man who doesn't understand social realities. Dostoevsky exposes the complete mechanics. The violence of the virtuous is always executed in the name of elevated values. They don't hurt for pleasure. They hurt out of moral duty. And that's the violence against which there's no defense, because it comes disguised as protection, as prudence, as love. Mishkin has a terrible gift. He sees people suffering even when they build facades to hide it. Ganya pretends confident ambition, but Mishkin sees the young man terrified by his own mediocrity. Nastasia performs cynical indifference, but Mishkin sees the woman destroyed by years of objectification. Rogozhin displays possessive passion, but Mishkin sees the man consumed by obsession. He doesn't even understand himself, and he offers compassion. Not unsolicited advice, not moralizing judgments disguised as concern, just recognition. I see you're suffering. You're not alone in it. It should be a gesture of kindness, but it functions as violation. People have a right to their masks. We spend years building personas that function in the world, edited versions of ourselves that can operate without exposing all the painful complexity we carry internally. When someone sees through those masks without permission, even with pure intentions, it's invasive. Imagine you're going through a deep existential crisis, doubt about your work, your marriage, your life choices, but you need to function. So you put on the mask of person who's fine, go to work, smile in meetings, answer everything's great when asked. And then someone looks in your eyes and says, "You're not fine, I see that." Even if it's true, even if it's said with kindness, there's violation in that act. You didn't authorize being seen that way. Mishkin doesn't understand this boundary. His compassion is involuntary, automatic. He can't not see, can't not care, and that makes people hate him. Not despite his kindness, but because of it. When kindness ignores people's right to hide their pain, it becomes violence. That's the paradox. Dostoevsky is asking a sophisticated philosophical question here. Can there be compassion that respects autonomy? Or does every attempt to truly see and help the other necessarily invade spaces that the person has a right to keep private? An easy answer would be convenient. What we have is the brutal recognition. Even pure virtue hurts when it ignores the boundaries people establish for self-preservation. And here we arrive at the harshest truth of the idiot. Mishkin, with all his authentic kindness, doesn't save anyone. Nastasia meets her tragic fate at Rogozhin's hands. Rogozhin ends up condemned to prison in Siberia. Aglaya, wounded by Mishkin's rejection, impulsively marries a Polish adventurer who deceives and abandons her. Ganya remains trapped in embittered mediocrity, never achieving the ambitions for which he sacrificed his dignity to pursue. Ippolit, the young nihilistic consumptive whom Mishkin tries to console, dies in despair without ever finding the meaning he sought. Everyone Mishkin tries to love, understand, redeem, everyone is destroyed or self-destructs. His kindness doesn't work. His kindness is authentic. But individual kindness doesn't defeat structures built on systemic cruelty. Dostoevsky destroys the comforting fantasy that permeates our culture. The idea that kindness wins in the end, that love conquers all, that being a good person is enough. Formula: there isn't one. You do everything right and still watch those you love destroy themselves. Because the world doesn't work like a moral fairy tale. Good intentions don't guarantee good results. Pure love doesn't heal deep social wounds. Individual compassion doesn't dismantle systems of oppression. This perception should be liberating, but it's devastating, because it means there's no clear path. You can do everything morally right and still fail to save those you love. Kindness ceases to be a guarantee of results and becomes just a choice you make, knowing it probably won't be enough. In middle age, this is no longer theory. It's a scar. They tried to save their partner from addiction. They failed. They tried to rescue their child from destructive choices. They failed. They tried to reform corrupted institutions from within. They failed. And then they have to confront the question: if kindness doesn't guarantee results, what's the purpose of being good? Dostoevsky doesn't offer a comforting answer, just an observation. Maybe the purpose isn't to win. Maybe it's just to witness, to be present in others' suffering, knowing you can't eliminate it, to offer compassion knowing it might not be accepted, to try knowing you'll probably fail, because the alternative, complete cynicism, abandonment of the attempt, is to surrender to the world exactly as it is, without even registering resistance. Mishkin's epilepsy functions as more than biographical detail. Dostoevsky, himself an epileptic, uses the condition as a spiritual metaphor. During seizures, in the seconds before the convulsion, Mishkin experiences what he describes as transcendent illumination. Moments of absolute understanding where everything makes sense, where universal love is tangible, where the separation between him and the rest of existence dissolves into pure unity. He says, "For this moment, I would give my entire life," and immediately adds, "But maybe it's just a symptom of the disease." He doesn't know if they're genuine mystical experiences or just abnormal electrical activity in the brain. And Dostoevsky purposely doesn't resolve this ambiguity, because the question isn't whether the experiences are real in the objective sense. The question is the cost. To achieve these moments of transcendent clarity, Mishkin pays with convulsions, loss of consciousness, gradual deterioration of his cognitive capacities. To experience kindness and love in absolute form, he needs to exit functional reality. Sainthood and sanity are incompatible. Think of anyone you know who lives according to radical moral principles. Activists who dedicate their lives to causes to the detriment of their own financial and mental health. Contemplative religious people who abandon worldly ambition. Artists who choose creative integrity over commercial success. There's always a cost. Always. You can't maintain absolute moral purity and also have a comfortable life, thriving career, social stability. The demands are contradictory. Society tacitly recognizes this when it categorizes these people as extremists, idealists, impractical. We admire from a distance, but don't imitate up close, because we instinctively understand living according to radical kindness requires sacrificing social functionality. And most of us, rightfully, aren't willing to make that sacrifice. Dostoevsky isn't romanticizing madness. He's diagnosing fundamental incompatibility. The world as currently structured doesn't accommodate people who live absolute kindness. They need to be domesticated, marginalized, or destroyed so the system continues functioning. And calling this disease is just the way society found to pathologize what it can't assimilate. Ippolit is a 19-year-old dying of tuberculosis. He writes his essential explanation, a nihilistic manifesto arguing that in a universe without God, without transcendent purpose, where everyone dies and is forgotten, life is absurd. Kindness is illusion. Morality is arbitrary social construction. Nothing matters. He reads this to Mishkin expecting some refutation, some theological argument, some easy philosophical consolation. But Mishkin simply listens. He doesn't debate, doesn't try to convert, doesn't offer platitudes about everything happens for a reason. He just acknowledges, your suffering is real. Your despair makes sense given what you're experiencing. I won't pretend to have answers that eliminate your pain. This scene shows a difference between performative kindness and authentic kindness. Performative kindness would need to win. Convince Ippolit he's wrong. Save him from nihilism. Have the last philosophical word. Authentic kindness just witnesses. Sits with the person in their despair without trying to control it, without trying to transform it into an edifying lesson, without needing it to end well. It's kindness that tolerates ambiguity. That can look at the abyss, the real possibility that suffering is meaningless, that there's no cosmic justice, that sometimes good people just suffer and die without redemption, and still choose compassion. Not because compassion changes the reality of suffering, but because it's the only possible human response to it. Ippolit attempts a desperate act after the reading. He fails. He spends the following months until his natural death being cared for by Mishkin, who never mentions the nihilistic text, never tries to argue against it, just offers presence. Ippolit dies without conversion, without a happy ending. The moral lesson, if it exists, remains opaque. There are just two human beings sharing space briefly before one of them ceases to exist. Dostoevsky knew something that contemporary self-improvement culture forgets. Some forms of kindness don't produce measurable results. They don't change behaviors, don't save lives, don't solve problems. They just exist as acts in themselves, with no purpose beyond being executed. Maybe that's enough, or maybe it isn't. There's no certainty. During a party at the Yapanchins' house, Mishkin has an epileptic seizure in public. Until then, high society tolerated his eccentricities. He was the half-strange but harmless prince, source of curious anecdotes. But in the seizure, he completely loses physical control, oscillating between lucidity and incoherence. He ceases to be entertainment and becomes embarrassment, evidence that there's something genuinely wrong, unpredictable, dangerous. The reaction is immediate. The same people who days before performed affection for him, the dear eccentric prince, turn their backs. Conversations are cut short, visits are cancelled, invitations stop arriving. Within weeks, he's completely excluded from the social circles that seem to have accepted him. Dostoevsky exposes the complete mechanics of performative charity. Society tolerates difference only as long as it's decorative, controllable, not too inconvenient. It tolerates the charming idiot who says naive but fundamentally harmless truths. It doesn't tolerate real illness, uncontrollable vulnerability, suffering that demands genuine response instead of abstract sympathy. Think about how we treat people with mental disabilities, chronic illnesses, conditions that disturb social order. We perform inclusion in awareness campaigns, use politically correct language, say that everyone deserves dignity. But when confronted with the messy reality, unpredictable behaviors, constant needs, inability to reciprocate socially, most people pull away. Because Instagram compassion is cheap. Compassion that demands real sacrifice of time, comfort, convenience is too expensive for most to pay. The Yapanchins don't feel cruel abandoning Mishkin. They feel prudent. After all, he needs professional care. It wouldn't be fair to Aglaya to tie her to someone so unstable. We did what we could, but there are limits. There's always a rational narrative available to justify abandonment. And Dostoevsky doesn't paint them as cartoonishly malignant villains. He paints them as ordinary people making ordinary choices of social self-preservation, which makes the criticism more devastating, because it means we're all the Yapanchins. We all have limits to how much suffering of others we're willing to witness before pulling away to protect our own peace. Rogozhin, consumed by obsessive passion and pathological jealousy, brings tragic fate to Nastasia. But Dostoevsky doesn't present this as a simple crime of passion. He constructs the scene with disturbing ambiguity. Nastasia spent the entire novel running from Mishkin and returning to Rogozhin. She knew, everyone knew, that Rogozhin was capable of this. She chose this danger repeatedly. Why? Dostoevsky suggests. Because this end at the hands of obsessive passion made sense to her. It was coherent with the narrative the world imposed on her. The fallen woman, the dangerous object of desire, the femme fatale who destroys men and is destroyed by them. Being saved by Mishkin's pure love would be living in permanent incoherence. It would be waking up every day, not believing she deserved that love, waiting for the moment when he realized who she really was, and abandoned her. The anxiety of that wait would be worse than the end itself. So she chooses this path. Not actively, she doesn't commit suicide, but passively. She repeatedly puts herself in a situation where violent outcome is a probable result. And when it finally happens, there's almost relief in the inevitability. It was always the possible ending. Now at least she doesn't have to wait for it anymore. Dostoevsky is working with a concept that psychology would only formalize decades later: repetition compulsion. Traumatized people tend to recreate patterns that hurt them because at least they're known patterns. Family abuse is terrifying but predictable. Healthy love is comforting but alien. And the fear of the unknown can be greater than the fear of familiar pain. Some people were so completely destroyed by the world that self-destruction is the only coherent narrative they can accept. And the society that destroyed them then condemns their inability to be saved as personal moral failure. We gave her so many chances. He just didn't want help. If she really wanted to change, she would. As if individual will was sufficient against years of traumatic conditioning. After what happened, Mishkin finds Rogozhin sitting beside Nastasia's body. The scene is one of the most disturbing in world literature. Rogozhin is in a state of dissociative shock, oscillating between lucidity and feverish delirium. Mishkin could scream, call authorities, react with horror and moral condemnation. It would be the expected, socially appropriate response. Instead, he lies down beside Rogozhin. He holds his hand. He spends the entire night there, consoling the man who just took the life of the woman they both loved. Not performatively. There's no audience. There are no witnesses who could admire his magnanimity. Just two men in the dark, one of them trembling with fever and guilt, the other offering silent presence. Dostoevsky forces the reader to confront: is this kindness or madness? Authentic compassion or absence of healthy moral boundaries? The question remains unanswered because maybe there is no answer. Maybe true compassion always looks like madness to those who live within the normal moral categories of good versus bad, victim versus guilty, who deserves empathy versus who deserves punishment. Mishkin recognizes in Rogozhin not a moral monster, but a human being who was consumed by psychological forces he himself didn't completely control. Obsessive passion transformed into possession, jealousy transformed into paranoia, fear of loss transformed into preventive violence. Rogozhin didn't wake up one day and rationally decide to become this. He was carried by an increasingly strong emotional current, to the point where the only exit his consumed brain could process was elimination of the source of his torture. This doesn't make the act acceptable. It doesn't eliminate moral responsibility, but it adds layers of understanding that go beyond simplistic condemnation. And Mishkin, incapable of thinking in binary categories, simply recognizes, this could be me in other circumstances. We all carry internal abysses. The difference between me and you isn't that I'm good and you're bad. It's that factors neither of us completely controlled led us to different manifestations of our human potential for destruction. This is the compassion that terrifies society of the virtuous, because it dissolves the boundaries that allow us to feel safe in our own goodness. If even those who committed the worst deserve compassion, if even the most serious crimes can be understood as the result of complex human circumstances, then no one is safe in the category of good person who would never do this. We're all capable of everything under sufficient pressure, and recognizing this is too terrible for most to bear. In the devastating ending, Mishkin regresses completely. He loses the capacity for coherent speech, doesn't recognize familiar faces, becomes catatonic. He's taken back to the Swiss sanatorium from where he came. The attempt to live absolute kindness in the real world destroyed him totally. He didn't die physically, but ceased to exist as a functional person. Dostoevsky offers no redemption. There's no epilogue where we discover that Mishkin's kindness planted seeds that eventually flourished. There are no secondary characters who learned from him and became better. Everyone continues in their mediocre or tragic lives, and Mishkin simply disappears from the story, forgotten. The message is, absolute kindness and functional existence in the world are incompatible. You can choose one or the other, but not both. Either you compromise your moral ideals enough to navigate social reality, learning when to lie, when to be cruel, when to protect yourself at others' expense, or you maintain moral purity and are crushed by the social machinery that wasn't built to accommodate saints. Those who've lived long enough already know, kindness doesn't guarantee results. They've already yielded on principles they swore were non-negotiable. They've already acted with necessary cruelty. They've already chosen silence when they should have spoken, or their own safety when they should have taken risks. They're not weak. They learned through painful years that moral purity charges a price, and most can't pay. Social isolation, financial instability, constant emotional cost of living against the current. And then comes the question that haunts. If we can't be absolutely good, what version of kindness is possible? If we need to lie sometimes, be strategic sometimes, protect ourselves sometimes, where do we draw the line? How much can we compromise before becoming the same people we criticize? Dostoevsky has no answer. The Idiot isn't a self-help book with 5 steps to sustainable kindness. It's a diagnosis of the human condition without a cure. But maybe there's wisdom in accepting that. In recognizing that kindness isn't a state you achieve and maintain, but a series of imperfect choices you make day after day, knowing you'll constantly fail. Maybe the only honest kindness recognizes its own impossibility, without performance of purity, without pretending to have answers it doesn't have, without feeling superior to those who failed differently. Kindness with radical humility. You're also capable of cruelty, product of forces you didn't choose, navigating a system where absolute kindness doesn't survive. Mishkin failed to save those he loved, but he tried. He saw suffering and didn't turn his back out of convenience. He witnessed human abysses without feeling morally superior. He offered compassion, knowing it probably wouldn't be enough. And maybe, in a world where absolute kindness is impossible, this imperfect attempt is the maximum integrity we can honestly claim. The question isn't how to be perfectly good, it's how to keep trying to be minimally decent knowing the world doesn't reward it, knowing you'll fail, knowing it might not make a difference. And the only honest answer is, you don't know if it's worth it. You just know that the alternative, complete cynicism, abandonment of the attempt, makes the world a little worse. So you continue, not because it guarantees results, but because it's the only gesture of resistance against systemic cruelty you can make. Dostoevsky ends The Idiot without resolving its contradictions. Mishkin is destroyed, Nastasia is dead, Rogozhin is condemned, everyone else continues their petty lives. And yet the novel exists. Yet generations of readers have crossed through its pages and emerged different, not because they learned how to be good, but because they were forced to confront that real kindness is infinitely more complex and dangerous than comforting narratives suggest. Maybe that's what literature does when done honestly. It doesn't offer solutions, but deepens understanding of the problem. It doesn't give answers about how to live, but shows why living well is so brutally difficult. And in this shared recognition of our collective moral inadequacy, maybe there's something like genuine compassion. Not because we believe we're good, but because we recognize we're all equally lost. Dostoevsky doesn't leave us an answer, he leaves us a wound. And maybe it's in that wound, and not in any certainty, that real humanity can be found. If you made it this far, you probably already understand. There are no perfectly good people. There are only people who keep trying despite knowing they'll fail. Dostoevsky didn't write a manual for kindness. He wrote an autopsy of why authentic kindness doesn't survive contact with reality. And maybe we need that diagnosis more than we need false hope. Have you ever woken up one day and thought, why am I doing all this? Working, studying, chasing goals. For what? If one day everything's going to end anyway, what's the point? This question bothers us because it touches on something we all feel, but few have the courage to say out loud. Albert Camus, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, didn't run from it. He looked straight at this frightening question and found an answer that can completely change how you see your own life. Before we begin, this video addresses deep existential questions in a philosophical and educational way. If you're going through a difficult time, know that there are professionals and people ready to help. Imagine a man condemned to push an enormous rock to the top of a mountain. When he finally gets there, exhausted, the rock rolls back down, and he has to start over. Again and again, forever. This is Sisyphus, a character from an ancient Greek myth that the gods punished in the worst possible way, an eternal and completely meaningless task. Seems cruel, doesn't it? But Camus looked at this story and saw something different. He saw all of us. Because deep down, isn't our life kind of like that? We wake up, work, sleep, wake up again. We chase after things that never completely satisfy us. We achieve something, and soon we're already pursuing the next goal. It's a cycle that doesn't stop. So Camus asked a strange question. What if Sisyphus is happy? What if there's a way to find joy even in a life that seems to have no final purpose? This crazy idea is what we're going to explore now. To understand Camus's answer, we first need to understand the problem he identified. He called it the absurd. It's not a complicated word, but what it means here is specific. The absurd happens when two things come into conflict. On one side, we have us, human beings, asking questions. We want to know why we exist, what our purpose is, what happens after everything ends, if there's any greater meaning in all of this. These questions are natural. They've been inside us forever. But on the other side, we have the universe. And the universe doesn't answer. It simply continues existing, indifferent to our anxieties. The stars don't care about our problems. Nature follows its rules without worrying whether they make sense to us or not. This clash between our need for answers and the silence of the world is what Camus calls the absurd. Imagine shouting in a huge cave and not even hearing an echo. It's that feeling of emptiness, that no matter how much you search, you won't find a definitive answer coming from outside. You can look at the sky, you can study science, you can dive into philosophy, but in the end, you always get that feeling. So what? What's the point of all this anyway? Camus realized that this feeling isn't our fault. It's not because we're stupid or because we haven't searched hard enough. It's simply the human condition. We're born programmed to seek meaning in a universe that offers none. And this is where things get heavy. Because if life really has no meaning, if we're trapped in this absurd situation with no way out, why continue? Camus went straight to the point, saying that this question of whether life is worth continuing is the only truly important philosophical problem. He wasn't being dramatic, he was being honest. If you conclude that life is worth nothing, that there's no purpose, that everything is empty, then logically this deep doubt arises. It's a logical and frightening conclusion. Many thinkers fled from this question or danced around it. Camus planted his feet on the ground and said, "Let's face this head on. The question isn't whether life is absurd, it is. The question is, what do we do about it?" Before showing his answer, Camus needed to discard the answers he considered false. The most common of these is the religious one. When life seems meaningless, many people turn to God, to faith, to the idea that there's something greater that gives purpose to everything. There's a divine plan. There's life after everything ends. There's reward in heaven. This answer comforts millions of people, and Camus wasn't saying they're wrong to believe, but he called this a philosophical escape. Why? Because it's giving up on facing the absurd. It's inventing a comforting answer instead of dealing with harsh reality. It's like covering your ears when someone says something you don't want to hear. For Camus, accepting these ready-made answers is betraying intellectual honesty. It's pretending the absurd doesn't exist instead of looking at it. Of course, it's easier to believe that everything has a hidden purpose, that one day everything will make sense, that there's a plan. But Camus wanted something different. He wanted an answer that didn't depend on inventing a world beyond this one. An answer that would work even if the universe is really silent and indifferent. An answer that would maintain human dignity without needing supernatural crutches. And he found this answer in an unexpected place. The first part of Camus's answer is revolt. We're not talking about picking up weapons or making political revolution. The revolt here is internal. It's an attitude. It's saying no to the absurd. But careful. It's not denying that the absurd exists. It's refusing to be crushed by it. It's like a boxer who knows he's going to get hit, but stays on his feet, keeps fighting. Revolt is this human stubbornness of not surrendering. The universe has no meaning. Fine, but I'm not just going to passively accept this and give up. I'm also not going to invent false stories to make myself feel better. I'm going to look the absurd in the face and say, I'm still here. You don't beat me. This revolt has something beautiful about it. It's affirming our humanity precisely at the moment when everything seems useless. It's keeping consciousness clear even when it would be easier to sleep. Camus admired this stance because it requires courage. It requires you to stay in the uncomfortable tension between wanting meaning and not finding any. Most people can't handle this tension. They either plunge into blind faith or plunge into despair. But there's a third option. Stay there, conscious, revolted, alive. And from this revolt, something surprising is born. If there's no meaning given from outside, if there's no God dictating what we should do, if there's no cosmic instruction manual, then something liberating happens. We're completely free. Think about it. You spend your whole life thinking you need to follow certain rules, meet certain expectations, achieve certain goals because that's how things should be. But what if it's not? What if nobody's keeping score? What if there's no final judge evaluating whether you lived right or wrong? Suddenly, all those obligations you were carrying on your back fall away. You can choose your own values. You can decide what matters to you, not based on what you were told, but on what you really feel and think. This freedom is scary because it's total. It's easier when someone tells you what to do, but it's also the greatest gift of the absurd. You don't need to live to please gods, satisfy social expectations, or reach some predetermined destiny. Your life is yours, completely yours, and that means you can fill it however you want. Of course, there are practical limits, real consequences, other people to consider. But philosophically, existentially, you're free from the invisible chains that bind those who still seek meaning outside themselves. But freedom alone isn't enough. Camus wasn't proposing that you simply do whatever you feel like without thinking. The second part of his answer is more interesting: passion. If life has no predetermined meaning, if we're not here to fulfill some sacred mission, then what's left? Living remains. Simply living. But not just any way. Living with maximum intensity. Living as much as possible. Experiencing, feeling, knowing, loving, creating. The idea is simple. Since the amount of time is limited, and we don't know how much we have, what matters is the quality and intensity of experiences. Camus wasn't talking about living irresponsibly or hedonistically in a shallow sense. It's not about partying every day or empty pleasures. It's about being present. It's about feeling your life happening instead of letting it pass while you're stuck in worries about the future or regrets about the past. How many times are you physically in one place but your mind is somewhere else? How many conversations do you have where you're not really there? How many experiences do you miss because you're thinking about the next one? Camus proposes the opposite. Dive into the now, because now is all that truly exists. This connects with an idea that might seem strange. The absurd man has no hope. Before getting scared, understand what he means. Hope, in the traditional sense, is projecting your happiness into the future. I'll be happy when I graduate. I'll be happy when I get that job. I'll be happy when I retire. Always a later, always a not yet. The problem is that while you wait for this future, the present slips through your fingers. You spend your whole life postponing real life. Camus says, "Stop waiting. Hope robs you of the present." What he offers instead of hope isn't despair, it's presence. It's living this moment, not because it will take you somewhere better, but because it's all you have. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. It means you don't need external justifications to enjoy a sunset. You don't need this moment to serve something greater. It can simply be lived, felt, appreciated, and that's enough. This is the passion Camus talks about. It's not fire that burns and passes. It's a way of being in the world, totally present, totally alive, without leaning on promises that things will get better or make sense someday. Now let's go back to Sisyphus, because everything starts to make sense. Remember him? Condemned to push that rock forever, never achieving anything, never getting anywhere. Sounds like the perfect definition of life without meaning, right? But Camus says a strange thing. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. What do you mean? How could anyone in that situation be happy? The answer is in everything we've talked about so far. Sisyphus isn't waiting for the rock to finally stay at the top. He knows that will never happen. He's not believing the gods will forgive him someday. He's not inventing stories about life after everything ends where he'll be rewarded. Sisyphus simply pushes the rock, and in this pushing, he finds something of his own. The struggle is his, the rock is his, the effort is his. Nobody can take that from him. When he walks down the mountain to start over, he's conscious of everything. He doesn't deceive himself. He knows exactly what his situation is, but he chooses to continue. And in this conscious choice, in this revolt against futility, in this decision to do his work even without reward, he finds dignity, he finds freedom, and yes, he finds a strange form of happiness, not the happiness of someone who got what they wanted, the happiness of someone who accepted what is and even so decided to live fully. You might be thinking, this is beautiful in theory, but how does this work in practice? How do you be an absurd man in real life? Camus offered some examples, some archetypes of people who live this philosophy without maybe even knowing it. Think of the conqueror. We're not talking about crazy emperors, but any person who acts, who does things, who launches into projects, knowing that in the end, everything will end anyway. This conqueror doesn't act because he believes in eternal victory. He acts because acting is living. The action itself is already the reward. Or think of the actor. He lives multiple lives, multiple characters. He experiences emotions and situations he would never live otherwise. And when the play ends, he doesn't get desperate. He knows it was fiction, that it was temporary, but he lived it intensely while it lasted. This is living absurdly, diving completely into experiences without needing them to be eternal or have purpose beyond themselves. Each role, each experience, each moment has its own value, not because it leads somewhere, but because it's lived. There's also the lover, who multiplies experiences of love and connection, not because he's looking for the perfect person who will complete him eternally, but because each encounter, each connection, each love is unique and intense. The absurd man doesn't romanticize. He doesn't believe in soulmates or destinies. But precisely because of this, he values each person, each shared moment, knowing it's precious exactly because it's temporary and doesn't need greater justification. Now I'll give you a very specific and everyday example, because maybe you're thinking, okay, but I work in an office doing repetitive bureaucratic tasks. How do I find revolt and passion in that? I learned about a guy named Roberto who works in the filing section of a large company. Every day, he organizes documents, types data, files papers. Seems like the most monotonous job in the world, right? For years, Roberto lived on autopilot. He'd wake up, go to work hating every minute, come home exhausted and frustrated. He lived waiting for the weekend, waiting for vacation, waiting for retirement. One day, after reading about these ideas, he changed his perspective. He didn't change jobs. He changed his attitude. First, he stopped waiting for the work to serve something grandiose. He accepted it was just bureaucratic work. But then he started looking for small moments of presence and choice within that routine. He decided he was going to do his work with total attention, not because someone was demanding it, but because it was his choice to do it well. Each correctly filed document became a small personal victory. He started really noticing his co-workers, having real conversations instead of just exchanging formalities. He discovered interesting stories, made genuine friendships. He created a ritual of having coffee before starting work, 5 minutes just for himself, tasting it, looking out the window, being completely present in that moment. He stopped mentally complaining all the time about how boring the work was and started accepting, this is it, this is my job now. It doesn't have to be my passion, but I can choose how I live these 8 hours. The work remained bureaucratic, but Roberto changed. He was no longer waiting for life to start after work. He was living during work too. It wasn't explosive happiness. It was something more subtle, a feeling of being present, of making conscious choices, of being alive even within routine. This is absurd revolt applied. It's not dramatic, it's not heroic, it's silent and personal. It's Sisyphus pushing the rock with dignity. These examples show something important. Living absurdly isn't sad or nihilistic. It's the opposite. It's living with more intensity because you're not trapped by unrealistic expectations. You're not frustrated because life doesn't match some script someone sold you. You're present, conscious, free. And from this freedom comes a greater capacity to really experience life. But here, we need to make a crucial distinction, because there's a lot of confusion about this. Camus wasn't a nihilist. Nihilism is the idea that nothing matters. So whatever, you can do what you want, because in the end, everything's lost anyway. That's not what Camus is saying. Quite the contrary. Precisely because there's no cosmic meaning is that each moment matters immensely. If this life is all we have, if there's nothing waiting after, then every second is precious. Every choice weighs. Every action has real consequences. The nihilist says, nothing matters, so I can destroy, I can hurt, I can do whatever I want. The absurdist says, nothing comes from outside to give meaning, so I give meaning, and I choose to live fully and consciously. It's a huge difference. One is giving up. The other is affirmation. One is passive and destructive. The other is active and creative. Camus was proposing that you build your own values, not that you abandon all value. And this brings us to another fundamental point: solidarity. When you recognize the absurd, when you accept that you're in this impossible situation of seeking meaning where there is none, you realize something. Everyone's in the same boat. Every person you see on the street who crosses your path, who lives their life, is facing the same absurd. We're all pushing our rocks up the mountain. We're all trying to make sense of what doesn't have any. And this shared consciousness can generate genuine compassion. You don't need religion to feel connection with other people. You don't need ideology to recognize that others' suffering is real and matters. In fact, when you remove these layers of beliefs that separate people into groups, the saved and the lost, the right and the wrong, the faithful and the unfaithful, what remains is purer. Human beings facing a difficult condition together. This can create a form of love and solidarity that doesn't depend on you and the other agreeing about the meaning of life. It only depends on recognizing that you're both alive, both conscious, both matter. There's also a dimension of Camus' answer that he valued greatly: creation, art, specifically. The artist is perhaps the perfect example of the absurd man. Why? Because the artist creates knowing that his creation won't solve the world's problems. A painting doesn't feed anyone. A poem doesn't cure diseases. A song doesn't bring back who's gone. In this sense, art is completely useless. But it's exactly in this uselessness that its beauty lives. The artist creates because he needs to create. Because expressing, giving form, imagining, building worlds is a fundamental way of being alive. Artistic creation multiplies the world. Each work is a new way of seeing, feeling, experiencing. And the artist isn't trying to explain the world or give final meaning to it. He's just adding more layers, more possibilities, more experiences. Is it absurd? Totally. Is it valuable? Immensely. You don't need to be a professional artist to live this. Any creative act, however small, is a form of absurd revolt. It's saying, I exist, I feel, I create, and this doesn't need justification. Now you might be wondering, okay, I understood the philosophy, but how do I apply this in my Monday life? When I wake up early, sit in traffic, work at something that doesn't excite me much, and come home tired. How do you be happy Sisyphus when life is boring and repetitive? It's a fair question, and the answer isn't magic. It's not like you wake up one day enlightened and suddenly everything makes sense. But there are small changes that make a difference. First, stop postponing your life. How many things don't you do because you're waiting for the right moment? When you have more money, more time, more security, when the situation improves, when. The right moment doesn't exist. There's only this moment. If you want to have a difficult conversation, have it now. If you want to do something you've always put off, start today. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to happen. Every day that passes, waiting for the perfect future, is a day you didn't really live. Second, question what you do out of obligation versus what you do by choice. Obviously, you can't just drop everything and live like a hippie on the beach. We have real responsibilities. But even within these responsibilities, there's room for choice. Do you work at this job because you really want to, or because you think you should want to? Do you maintain certain relationships because they're meaningful, or because it's what you do? Do you pursue certain goals because they're yours, or because you absorbed that you should pursue them? Asking these questions is already an act of absurd revolt. It's starting to build a life that's really yours. Third, practice being present. This might sound like cheap self-help, but it's not. It's difficult and requires training. When you're eating, really taste the flavor. When you talk with someone, really listen. When you walk down the street, notice what's around you. Our brain lives on autopilot. We do things mechanically while our mind is somewhere else. Fighting against this, forcing yourself to be here and now, is a way of living with more intensity. And intensity is what the absurd man seeks. Fourth, accept that you're going to leave one day and that everything will end. Sounds morbid, but it's liberating. When you really accept your finitude, small things that stressed you lose importance. That silly fight, that worry about what others think, that fear of making mistakes. If everything's going to end anyway, why waste your limited time on that? Better to use that time to live, to experience, to be with those you love, to do what makes you feel alive. The end isn't the enemy. It's the frame that gives contour and value to life. Fifth, create your own rituals and values. You don't need the ones that were passed to you if they don't make sense to you. What really matters to you? Justice? Beauty? Knowledge? Love? Adventure? There's no right answer, but be honest with yourself, and then live according to these values you consciously chose. This isn't selfishness, it's authenticity. And authentic people tend to be more generous and present with others because they're not spending energy pretending to be what they're not. There's something also about work and repetition. Many people hate the feeling that every day is the same. Wake up, do the same things, sleep, repeat. Seems like a prison. But remember Sisyphus? His life is literally the same task eternally. And still, Camus says he can be happy. How? Finding meaning in the act itself, not in the result. If you can find something in the process, something that connects you with what you're doing, repetition stops being a prison and becomes rhythm. Becomes your rhythm. This doesn't mean you need to love every second of your work. It means you can find small moments of presence, of choice, of humanity, even within routine. It can be a good conversation with a colleague. It can be doing something well for the simple pleasure of doing it well. It can be an instant of silence with your coffee before starting the day. These details seem small, but they're what make a life. Life isn't made of the big moments. It's made of thousands of small moments, and you have some control over how you live each one of them. Another important point: be careful with comparisons. The social media era turned comparison into a sport. Everyone seems to be living incredible lives, achieving impressive goals, being happy all the time. But this is an illusion. First, because people only show what they want to show. Second, because even if it were real, it doesn't matter. Someone else's life has nothing to do with yours. If you've accepted the absurd, if you've understood there's no right script, then it doesn't make sense to measure your life by someone else's ruler. Your only responsibility is to live your life as fully and consciously as possible. And that's different for everyone. There's also the question of failure. Our society is terrified of failure. But if you embrace the absurd, failure loses much of its power. Because in the end, everything's going to crumble anyway. You're going to leave. Your achievements will disappear. Your name will be forgotten. This isn't depressing, it's liberating. It means you can try things without being afraid of failing. You can make a fool of yourself. You can experiment. You can change your mind. After all, what's the worst that can happen? Nothing matters in the end from a cosmic point of view. So you're free to do what matters to you now, without the crushing weight of having to be perfect or leave an eternal legacy. And what about others? How do you relate to people when you accept that nothing has ultimate meaning? Curiously, it gets easier, not harder, because you're not putting unrealistic expectations on anyone. You're not waiting for someone to complete you or give meaning to your life. You're not judging others for not living according to some absolute standard. You simply meet people, share moments, experience connections. Some will be deep and last. Others will be brief and pass. Both have value. Both are part of the experience of being alive. Love, specifically, becomes more real. Because you don't love someone, because God determined it, or because it's destiny, or because this person will fill an existential void inside you. You love because you choose to love. Because being with this person makes you feel alive. Because sharing experiences with them multiplies the intensity of being in the world. And when it ends, if it ends, you're not destroyed looking for the hidden meaning of the loss. You feel the pain, which is real, but you also know that what you lived was real and valuable while it lasted. Children also enter this conversation. Many people have children looking for meaning, continuity, immortality through descendants. But if you start from the absurd, you have children for other reasons, because you want to share the experience of being alive with a new being. Because creating and educating someone is an intense way of living. Because love is a multiplier of experiences. But you don't put on your children the responsibility of giving meaning to your life or continuing your legacy. You let them be themselves, face their own absurd, find their own path. One thing that sometimes goes unnoticed in Camus' philosophy is that it's not solitary. Even though it's about each person finding their own way of dealing with the absurd, this doesn't mean isolation. On the contrary, when you free yourself from the need to convince others that your way of seeing the world is right, you can finally meet people for real. You don't need them to believe what you believe. It's enough that they exist, that they're human, that they share this absurd condition with you. And that's enough for genuine connection. Politics and society can also be seen through this lens. You don't fight for justice because some God commanded it, or because history is inevitably marching toward progress. You fight because it's your choice, because it's how you decide to live your revolt against the absurd. You help others not because you'll earn points in heaven, but because you recognize in them the same struggle that exists in you. This kind of ethics isn't less strong for not having a transcendent foundation. It's even stronger because it comes from real choice, not from obedience. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Most people don't want to think about these things. They prefer ready-made answers, prefabricated meanings, comfortable certainties. And that's okay. Everyone deals with life the way they can. But if you're watching this, if these ideas resonate with you, it's because you're one of those who can't simply accept without questioning. You feel the absurd. And now you have a way of dealing with it that isn't giving up and isn't deluding yourself. It's a third way. It's the way of happy Sisyphus. Implementing this doesn't happen overnight. It's not a one-time decision. It's daily practice. Every day you wake up and the absurd is there. Every day you need to choose again. Am I going to run away? Am I going to give up? Or am I going to revolt and live? Some days are easier. Other days the rock seems too heavy, but the choice remains yours. And the more you practice being present, creating your values, living intensely, the more natural this becomes. One last thing about Sisyphus. Camus focuses a lot on the moment when he walks down the mountain after the rock rolled back. That moment of pause. Sisyphus walks back down, alone, conscious that he's going to start everything over. In this moment, he's totally lucid. He knows exactly what his situation is, and it's in this moment that he can choose. He can despair. He can revolt with anger, or he can simply accept, breathe, and start over. This moment of descent, this moment of clear consciousness, is as human as possible. It's where our freedom lives. It's where our dignity lives. It's where, strangely, our joy lives. Life is absurd. That's a fact. But within this absurd, you have space to create, to love, to fight, to experience, to be truly alive. You don't need cosmic permission. You don't need divine purpose. You don't need a traced destiny. You just need to choose every day to push your rock with consciousness and presence. And in this repeated choice, in this stubbornness to continue even knowing there's no glorious final destination, you find something that no external meaning could give you. You find your own humanity, complete and authentic. So, if life has no meaning, why live? Camus' answer is simple and profound. Because you can. Because being alive is better than not being. Because each moment lived consciously is your small victory over the silence of the universe. Because you don't need grandiose reasons to justify your existence. Your existence justifies itself. And when you fully accept this, when you stop looking for explanations that will never come and simply start living, something magical happens. You realize the question was wrong from the beginning. Life doesn't need to have meaning to be worthwhile. In fact, it's exactly because it has no meaning imposed from outside that you can give it whatever meaning you want. You're free, completely free. And with this freedom comes responsibility, yes, but also infinite possibility. Every day is a blank page. Every choice is yours. Every moment can be lived fully or wasted. It only depends on you. Sisyphus pushes his rock. The rock rolls back, and he walks down, conscious, to start over. And us? We wake up, live our day, sleep, wake up again. Seems repetitive, seems meaningless. But we can be like Sisyphus. We can find our strange happiness in this repetition. We can make each climb a conscious experience. We can choose our attitude. We can revolt against the absurd by continuing to live, continuing to try, continuing to feel. And that, in the end, is everything. It's enough. It's more than enough. If this way of seeing life makes sense to you, if these ideas touch something inside you, then you're already on the path of Sisyphus, the path of the absurd man. It's a path with no final destination, but it's a path you choose consciously. And in this choice lives all the difference. It's not easy. It was never promised it would be, but it's real, it's honest, and it's deeply human. So, why live if life has no meaning? Because living is your way of saying yes to existence, even when existence gives you no reason to do so. It's your revolt. It's your freedom. It's your humanity. And you, modern Sisyphus, can be happy. If you made it this far and these ideas resonated with you, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to keep exploring philosophy and different ways of seeing life. Share with someone who needs to hear this. And most importantly, get out of here and live. Push your rock with consciousness. Be your own happy Sisyphus. Until next time.